this works. Okay, so well, I guess should I just take the taxi out? Or should I attempt to... That's way too far. Let's just go for that. This one has 2 keys. There's a yellow key right there. I guess I'll grab these just to have them. Oh, that's weird. Oh, okay, just didn't like that. That's all. Okay. So that's a nice archipelago all the way out to here. This is too big, probably. Is that one sector? Then we go up this way. And then there's a gap here. That's close enough, though, right? Up, and then north. Okay. Press. It's in the worst location. Q is great if you have to tap it. It's terrible if you have to hold it down, because turning left is suddenly a problem. Definitely wish this game would let you have minute control over how your stuff works. That would be the most excellent version of it. So you can do something wild like have check weapon be hold and then repair weapon release. So you hold it down to check what's wrong with your weapon, and then you release it, and it fixes the jam or whatever, the malfunction. That's, at least this game lets you toggle shoulders with your mouse. That's good. These caves aren't worth a darn. But that's kind of the problem with the deep desert in general. It's too empty and there's not enough to do. But sandbiking across it like this is a way, perhaps, to see what the, see more of the landscape, see more of the love the devs put into the world, and check it out, because there's a lot of cool stuff, if you just drive around out here in the deep desert. It's just that if you're flying over it in a copter, it all looks kind of the same, because, you're high enough that it's mitigated by that. The ship. This is the path down. Glitchy. Of course, this is doing the sandbike thing is very bumpy. This relative to flying a copter. At least it's not as bad as the Mako and Mass Effect one that was anti-fuel. I say that as someone who played that game to completion 3 times. 100% of it 3 times. So, driving, I spent hours and hours and hours and hours driving around with Mako, and it was torturous. Even when you get better at, understanding how the map is laid out. You can make sensible decisions about what surfaces to go up and what not to. All they either had to do was give your thing more torque so that it could go up the hills better, or, give it more stability. Either one of those things would have worked. I mean, turning into a skimmer would have been the best option, but, Alright. Let us away into the desert. I'm not sure if the booster makes worms more likely or less likely. It doesn't seem to make a difference on the controls, or on the HUD even. But that doesn't mean it's doing nothing. Go about 2.5 kilometers before the worm will come up and get you. Go 2.5 kilometers, and the worm will come up and try to get you. But if you're, moving in a straight enough line and get to the rocks in an expedient way, then you're golden. So that's definitely the thing. The archipelago I want? Sure. Yeah, once you're down here, really, you can really see how big some of these dunes are. None of these are especially big, but they're pretty standard sized. Like, they're a lot bigger than you think they are. That's why if you're flying around trying to map this place on a Thopter, sometimes the best place to park is just on top of a dune rather than trying to climb a rock spire. There's also some wild, like, precipices like this dude over here. It's all, big and whatnot. Okay, there we go. So, up over. Let's take a look, see at all this. It's kind of weird that they're, I'm very happy they got rid of quicksand out here, because now you can drive across the desert, which is awesome, but it's kind of weird that there's no drum sand out here. That's a strange, I don't know, maybe it's computationally, programmatically difficult or something like that to make it not be a pain in the butt. Or maybe they think that people just won't interact with it enough for it to matter, but it certainly would be an interesting. I kind of wish there were more types of sand, John Stakely wrote one of, I'm going to call it the 3 great power armor novels: Starship Troopers, Forever War, and Armor. And if I recall correctly, he specifically wrote Armor because he read Starship Troopers and basically said, hey, this is great, but how about we leave, how about less politics, more fighting? Then obviously Joe Haldeman's masterpiece is a meditation on, the alienation, leaving to go fight in a war that people more or less don't care about. But anyway, the thing that Armor had that was incredibly cool was that there were just a whole bunch of different varieties of sand on the main planet that they're fighting on, and it does all kinds of different stuff. There's some that's incredibly compacted and it's closer to sandstone, and then there's some that looks like it's solid but give way, and then there's some that it's really easy to run on, and others that it's awful to run on, and some that make noise that will give away your position, some that's incredibly quiet. There's just a wide variety of stuff you can do with it. Obviously not all those things would matter in this game per se, but it would be a neat thing to have. Plus, the color variation would be nice, because that's something that's a little bit of a bummer. And I was just chatting about this yesterday because I don't remember if Dune has, or if Arrakis has any volcanosis going on, but volcanic sand is often very cool because it's covered in. Okay, we're gonna go north. It's often. Where is that? Eyes anywhere. Well, I don't have a Thopter, so I can't go look at it. Or I can't see. I wonder where it fell. Stroke, I know. Yeah, there's all kinds of different colors of sand that exist that would be pretty cool to experience. You know, like if you go to Hawaii, there's black sands and stuff like that because of the, you know, all of the lava, the igneous rocks and whatnot getting ground down on the beach. And I feel like there's also green sand somewhere, although my memory is escaping me as to where that actually is. You know, and then obviously you get your pure white sands and red sand. You know, there's a lot of there's out in like Arizona and stuff like that. There's the painted desert and all that sort of stuff. So there's, you know, there's a lot of color to be had out in the desert. One thing that this game did that I really like is that it showed like all the wildlife that's everywhere, because there's deserts, you know, often have this sort of like alien, soulless, there's nothing going on here type vibe to them, but that's, you know, the opposite of what's actually going on. Deserts are full of stuff most of the time. There are very few deserts that are actually like empty and devoid of life. You know, especially a lot of the deserts in the American Southwest. There's just, you know, all kinds of interesting stuff. You've got like Joshua Tree, which is just full of Joshua trees, and then near that there's another national park, the name of which escapes me, where there's a whole bunch of like fossilized trees and stuff out there. You know, then you've got like the Mojave Desert and the Sonoran Desert, you know, all that sort of stuff. So there's quite a bit of color and life out in the desert, and a lot of variety too. You know, and my experience of the Gobi is limited, so I can't really comment on necessarily on what that looks like. Because I've only ever seen it basically, you know, movies and pictures, and I assume they're going for some specific aesthetic rather than there has to be sort of a minimum amount of life and resources in a location for humans to be able to, you know, do agriculture and all that jazz and survive out there. So okay, there's a rock over here. Look at this before taking off, which was a mistake, because it's a spice below. Alright, let's see here. Oh, okay, it is a big gap. That's fine. This is a small enough gap that it'll be safe. It's 1/3 kilometer. That's fine. See how this turns out on the far side. Oh, was that a big spice blow? It's hard to tell, honestly, now. All of my scales are for flying helicopters. I don't remember. I don't have a good visual arc for it. Yeah, hopefully for the PvP update they'll have, you know, like big crawlers and stuff like that we can assault and do something kind of like Battlefield 2142, where you've got like the Leviathans or whatever, so you like, if you hold enough battlefield objectives you can shoot up into the Leviathan and go like take it down in like a weird pseudo boss fight thing. So that would be really cool. So the PvP out here is basically griefers. It's funny, the other week I was on I was out in the, you know, doing a large spice thing with a friend of mine, with a sand crawler, and the first person we had seen in weeks, I heard that whisper noise of the Bene Gesserit, and then I see a guy who looks like my friend standing outside of the sandcrawler. I'm like, did you get out of the sandcrawler? What's going on? And it's like, oh no, that's a guy who saw us and did the Bene Gesserit sprint across the sand to attract a sandworm to just ruin our time there. Like, he didn't even go back to get it. So we had to take off and fly away, go back into the safe zone just to be sure, because we don't want to get our thing shot down and So it was a very silly, like, oh, this guy literally just came in to mess with us, and that was it. It was a real annoyance. You know, so I'm hoping there's more structured PvP. You know, like something more like a battleground, something like that. Like give us a location, like you know, spoilers, but that final mission for Beast Ravan where you go, oh god, what have I done? I'm going the wrong way. Where you go fight, you know, you go into the Atreides stronghold and that sort of thing. Like that map, that level was awesome. I wish I had been able to capture it on video, but it, you know, is this huge set piece with a ton of open areas. Actually, is the big thing, and you know, this awesome brutalist architecture that I love. But you know, I'm like, oh, if you just turned this into like a PvP battleground and changed a little bit, it would be super cool. You know, and to that point, it's very interesting that there's not regions of you know, something like this, the deep desert, a big open area. Like, it's interesting that they didn't go for somewhere that you can't like fly around. You know, or if you try to, you get shot down. You know, just have NPC. You know, there's all those big guns with like the Harkonnen and the Atreides stuff. Just have them shoot people down or whatever. But yeah, you know, it'd be really great if there were more battleground-y style type things. And, you know, even the durability thing is a huge killer, definitely, for this. Like, it's such a pain in the butt. Obviously, it would be too much programmatically to go back now, but I think they should, instead of doing tiers of stuff, they should have done like material properties, since they've already got like damage types and stuff like that. It's like, okay, you know, copper is useful against light darts, and iron is useful against heavy darts, and steel is good against blades, or you know, whatever, right? And plastinium against fire or poison or whatever. You know, there's all these kinds of things that you could do for damage mitigation and damage dealing and blah blah blah. So I kind of wish they had gone for something more like that, but you know, I also understand why they didn't. But anyway, one of the things is, you know, people have gear fear, which very understandable, especially for that, like, you know, the Mark 5 or the, you know, grade 5 plastinium stuff. Like, you don't want to risk that. I mean, God, that takes forever to get, you know. And so
Sector weather alert.
I think what they should have done.
A large sandstorm is approaching.
On that front is instead of making it so that you wear your own gear out there, it's more of a, you know, there's just standard loadouts that you can kit yourself out in. You know, even it'd be fine if you pick all the pieces, right? You know, you pick all the equipment you want, whatever, right? Customize it and that sort of thing, but like don't just equalize all the gear and the level and stuff, because that's one of the main mistakes that I see a lot of games do, is that they try to make the PvE and the PvP balanced with each other, which is, I think, a meaningless thing. Like, just do what Elder Scrolls Online did, and you know, you've got your PvE gear, which is good against the PvE stuff, and then you have the PvP gear, which is good against the PvP stuff. You know, and just have those things like that. That'd be one way to do it. But
Sector weather alert.
The gear
a large
fear.
Sandstorm is approaching.
The gear fear is real, and it would be good to mitigate that. You know, and the other thing too is like things like the Landsrad. You know, this server I'm on, I'm basically the only guy doing my faction's work, and that means that I've never won the Landsrad, right? Even though I've done dozens of hours of work for it. And that's very common, as you might imagine. Park this out here, or on the roof maybe, just make sure everything closes. You know, so it's very annoying to have put in all of that work and you basically get no reward. So they need to do something where it's not a zero-sum game, where it's like you win the Landsrad or you don't. It needs to be more proportional, and you know, like the house rewards are fine. They're not great. Like there's still a weird glitch where you get the sandfly carver, like the tier 4.
Sector
You
weather.
get the tier 4 cut
Alarm
array for some
sandstorm is
reason.
approaching.
That's definitely a failure of things. But they're fine. Like they're not great, but they're fine. And I do like the remembrances, the recollections stuff. That's all right. It's a little annoying that it's limited to a certain amount per week, but I also understand that they don't want people to just blast through it and, you know, have huge gaps between people and that sort of thing. So I do kind of wish that what they would do is just have like 5 missions at every location instead of the way it's set up currently. It's a little wonky trying to figure everything out. Like, don't get me wrong, I think the Broodworks is a really cool map by, you know, Blushing Cavern. I think Blushing Cavern is a more interesting map than Broodworks, but it's more annoying to go through because you have to backtrack constantly to go do stuff. You know, when you have to go fight the, you know, I forgot the name of the quest, but you got to kill the 2 bosses. Like the fact that you kind of have to backtrack all over the place for that is a little bit annoying. And you can't do it in whatever... A lot of these missions you can't do in whatever order you want, even though they're sort of like it shouldn't matter. Like the one where you're sabotaging all the vehicles in Broodworks. It's like, okay, why can't I just do this in any order? Like, it shouldn't matter. So, like, trying to map out an optimal run through any of those places is a pain in the butt, you know. And obviously there's other attendant things on there, but... You know, I think the new content has been interesting, even if it is grindy. Like they've got something there that they could work on if they just make it less of a grind and more engaged. I think what they probably should have done is some procedural generation, honestly, for like the layouts of the testing stations. And I know that doesn't quite make sense, but you know. They just need a little bit of variety. That's all. A little bit more variety. You know, and the drop rates are pretty brutal too. Like the double XP weekends have been, and the double drops weekends have been such a godsend because they're so much better. But you know, again, that's like like I didn't have my PC, so I had to like beg, borrow, and steal time to play on someone else's device, you know, and so that was a huge annoyance on my end, you know, and so I basically spent, you know, an entire Saturday just playing and during someone else's off hours, and that was really annoying because the amount of movement you can get on these once you get up, you know, into the 20s here is it's very slow. You know, it takes there's 100 levels in each of these. Like it takes for gall darn ever. You know, and plus the rewards thing is great because you can use it as a secondary source of deep desert resources. I don't know. You know, I understand they're sort of like trying to meet people halfway on the PvE versus the PvP thing, and I think that they, you know, the deep desert's an interesting idea, right? But the core it has 2 core problems. It's too big and too empty. And it's simultaneously there's too much to do and not enough to do. And I realize that sounds oxymoronic, but hear me out. Like, they've combined too many activities in one area with the hopes sort of that PvP is going to keep the tension and that sort of thing there. But, you know, the crux of the issue there is that you've basically got 3 groups of people running around. You've got your sand farmers who want to just go out, get stuff, be left alone, and, you know, do the PvE content. Then you've got the PvP people who are like, yeah, let's go out and fight. I want to, you know, have a good time, play against other people, you know, all that sort of thing. And then you've got the griefers. And the griefers are just out there to ruin whoever's day they can. You know, and that's the problem is the setup is catering to the griefers. And, you know, a lot of people, I've seen tons of comments on Reddit and that sort of thing where people are like, well, it's realistic, you know, that people can be this way. And it's like, okay, look, in the real world, when people behave this way, we elect a sheriff and they gather deputies and they go solve that problem. That's what that looked like in the real world. Like, people forget that a sheriff is an elected official, right? They're not you know, it's not some state-sponsored dude. It's like literally the people of the town get together and elect one, and they vest the authority to deal with troublemakers into that person. You know, and if the sheriff doesn't do the job, then people will form a posse, and we know what happens when people with torches and pitchforks get going, right? That's what happens in real life. But there's no function for something like that in here, which means people can behave poorly with very few consequences, which means that the people who want to behave poorly can and will. You know, and so it's a very cool idea. It's a very cool idea. The execution has some problems, and the incentive structure is bad. That's the crux of the issue, right? Because it's only good for the people who don't care about who just want to ruin other people's days, right? Because if they have minimal investment in themselves to go wreck someone else's time, you know, like I'll give you an example, like just what I was talking about with the sandcrawler earlier. The guy can run up, flip on his shield, and then suddenly the worm is out there causing grief to me and whoever else, right? Basically free to the guy because he's got a pocket thopter and he can jet away, right? How much time did it take him to sneak up on us? You know, he probably landed on a dune. He landed over the crest of the dune because it's a giant crater, and then he just, you know, Prana Bendu sprinted, and then boom! Suddenly there's a, you know, there's an what is this? Duralumin, whatever. You know, so there is that sort of core level issue on all of that, where there's no incentive. There's not a good incentive structure. And you know, back when the game was super fresh and there were lots of people on. Oh, you know what? I know why I wanted to go back to the things, because that's where all of my building materials are. Whoops. Oh well. Did I leave anything in here that's actually... Yeah, I've got all this. That's it. Okay, so all of my building tools are still out in the desert. Yay. That's fine. I will fly... Well, now. What should I do on that front? Yep, I'll just see. I'm gonna check something real quick. No, not online. Alright, well, don't have any of my stuff, unfortunately, but I guess I could just shove everything in here. No, because I still have... Right, I still don't have my combat gear. Well, how much stuff do I have? Got this. I don't have a cutter ray. I'll just improvise, it'll be fine. Alright. Oh, no, I want to keep you. And I'll put those elsewhere. Missiles can go here too. But yeah, anyway, the incentive structure of the deep desert is warped in a bad way. Yeah, I realize it's a hard thing to work on. Don't get me wrong, I understand that game development is incredibly difficult. I've done some of it myself. You know, so I am fully sympathetic to that. I just think that there's a lot of areas where some more forward planning and thinking about, structure and behavior would have gone a long way. Because the deep desert was to my point that I never got to because I realized I had left all my stuff out. The reward structure is heavily skewed towards basically monopolies on violence. So like your guild is sufficiently large, you can just crowd everyone out, and then they can't build up enough power to compete against you, right? And there's no outside mechanism for dealing with that, so you just end up with instead of a back and forth, you just have a mono-dominant group there, right? Which and you can't really commit to asymmetrical warfare or asymmetrical stuff in a meaningful way that respects players' time, because that's the X factor here, right? Is that you have to guard against people who are going to no-life the game versus people who are playing the game casually but still want to have access to all the content. And I think the fact that they shoved everything in one location, far end, was a mistake, because they had a vision, which was interesting, but it was incongruent with reality. And that's why the population of the game just plummeted, because it was not fun for the majority of people who wanted to just do the deep desert content and be left alone, right? So, and then for the people who want to stand up PvP, well, there's not a lot of that to be had, because it's basically like, if you get lucky, you can go find people who might want to fight you, but they're, the only people who had a good time were the griefers. Let's put it that way. And obviously, there's huge variance between servers. People had a great time on certain servers. People just had a great time, and they're still having a great time with PvP. And they think it's the bee's knees, right? And that's awesome for you.
I need reinforcements.
That is not majority experience aligns. Oh, cutter ray. Well, that's because I came here to get a cutter. Oh man, turns out when you take away all of your gear and you don't have all the stuff you're used to having, it can be a problem. Alright, I'm gonna have to fight these guys. That's okay. And then I'm gonna collect their... Is there scrap metal lying around here? Sure. Not. Well, worst case, I'll just fly along the bottom of Haga. Is there really not? Where's this other person? Oh, there they are. I love me some PvP games. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I think that some of the most fun I've had, is in like Hell Let Loose or Battlefield 2142 or Battlefield 3. Play a lot of Battlefield, as you can tell, or I played, I should say, past tense, a lot of Battlefield. And so I'm fully, or like some of the Dark Souls PvP was tremendously fun, right? But like the big difference is that a lot of that has sort of this consensual aspect to it, right? Where you are aware of what it's not that you're aware of what you're getting into, it's that you have consented to the fight in general, right? So those are two different things, because the way they did it was here they're like, okay, here's all the goodies that are out in the PvP zone, you gotta go get them if you want to be able to use them, right? And so, like, to me, primarily PvE in this game, I'm like, okay, well, I want the goodies. I have to go into the PvP zone to go get them. But the PvP is not the mean. The PvP is the means to the end. It's not the end in and of itself. Whereas something like Hell Let Loose, the PvP is the juice. Like, it's 100% of the reason you play the game. So like, and that's sort of the fundamental disconnect that a lot of this had, was that, there's a significant population of people who played the game. I'm gonna guess that it was the majority of the people who played the game who did not want to do PvP and were basically forced to do it because the content that existed, out there for all the Plastanium stuff was in the deep desert. And it's like, and if it had been, it's just one of those things where, like, the choices they made in development for that were, I think, misaligned with what the majority of the player base were interested in doing, and so that caused a lot of grief, and just quit the game and never came back, which is a shame, because this game has a lot to offer. It's very cool, and there's a lot of awesome stuff to do in the game. But when you do something like that, you basically don't respect the player's time, or do it's a lot of survival crafting games have the problem where it becomes a chore simulator, right? This is a problem I had with Don't Starve and Don't Starve Together, so that eventually you reach a point where you're just spending all day running around doing tasks to keep your base going, to keep yourself alive, and you're not able to make progress because you've got too much to do. That's where you need something with automation to. This game does a bit better on that front because you've got all of the, all the refineries and stuff like that. You can shove stuff in, leave them alone, go away, whatever, and they also get more and more efficient and that sort of thing. Right? That's it. And the mining rays, the cutter rays, and all that sort of thing, they get more efficient. I think that was a great move on that part. I still think that the basic cutter ray should be able to cut anything, because I've run into some weird situations where, like, my cutter ray broke on a mission and I had to, like, cut through something, and I didn't have a cutter ray that could cut through that mineral. I think it was erythrite. So, like, there's some, obviously some areas where there's improvement needed, or maybe some. Oh, that's a shame. Why won't it not let me swap this? Is it because I'm in a PvP zone? I've never... No, because it let me take it out. Why can't I equip this? What is going on here? Okay. Did it not like it because I made it inside of my inventory while I was flying? Yeah, it doesn't even select. Oh boy. Well, that's a bug. Alright, let me just see if I can make a new one. Maximum jank. Alright, will you work? I wonder. Yep. What's up? No joy. Oh, hey, I'm testing out streaming this, so if you hear me muttering to myself, that's what's going on. Well, that's jank right there. Can't even move it. Ah, great. That's going to be a huge problem, taking up an entire inventory slot with an immovable object. Poor bug. Oh, you know what? Actually, hang on. This. do a zone transition and see if that fixes it. Sometimes that works. So this is there we go. Just ran into a weird bug. I started making a cut array, hopped in my Thopter, and then I tried to move it around a little bit, but it's still taking up an inventory slot.
Great.
Yeah. So, and you know, this is a game where inventory slots matter, so that's less than great. I'm gonna do a zone transition and see if that unsticks it, because sometimes that does, but that's gonna really suck. Anyway, as I was saying, this game needs something more structural for PvP to be enjoyable for people, because, you know, you need to consent to it. It can't be this sort of like thing that happens to you, you know, like. Oh, and you know, obviously the fact that you can't group up, the markers didn't work, and you know, there were all these like the fact that you're in a faction. It's like if you're in Harkonnen or Atreides, and then other Harkonnens can go kill you. It's like, okay, but so why have factions apart from the Landsrat? That was another thing that's just baffling to me. You know. But you know, the arena thing that they put in by Neo Carthag, like you could do something like, you know, maybe not that small of a scale, but like, that could be an interesting PvP thing where like you're representing a different house out there trying to, you know, do that stuff. Like that would be cool. You know, no reason. You know, I'm just gonna park this under the shield here. That would 100% be an interesting way to have PvP. And for all I know, that it exists, because I didn't actually look into it too deeply. But like, you know, and the thing that I liked about that arena was it changed a little bit every time, and there were variations, and you know, that sort of thing. Like it was not the same fight every single time, which is not true of some of these. Okay, it moved. Okay, cool. I've got 2 improvised cut arrays that don't do anything. I'm gonna get rid of both of them though, because they're cursed. They are accursed objects. You know, it's kind of got the same. It's got the same problem most of these types of games have, where the incentive structure is warped, and that means that people will engage with it the worst way possible. You know, it's the same problem that Arc Raiders had, although they, you know. Arc Raiders has a problem that if you want to do PvE, like they've got the aggression-based matchmaking, which is awesome, fully support, but if you want to play with your friends, you're hosed, because it's all PvP all the way, baby. You know, and you know, that's a problem for the people who want to do PvE with their friends, and you know, it's the same reason why PvE Tarkov is the most popular version of that game, because people want to go in and have fun and not have to worry about losing stuff, which is the same reason why, you know, games like Hell Let Loose, people don't care about dying because it only costs time, right? Whereas this doesn't cost time, it costs effort, a lot of effort. Let me put it to you this way. This right here took a week of real-world time for me and my guildies to gather the resources for and make, right? Way back when we first were trying to do it, right? If we lost that at that point in time, it would be a catastrophic loss, because it was the full investment of everything we had up to that point. That's why, you know, I've got all these random Plastanium tier weapons and stuff in here. It's because I'm eventually gonna decon those when I get the perk all the way up for the recycler, right, and get the maximum amount of that stuff back. But like, yeah, we made that behemoth back when it was the, you know, the most brutal version of of the PvP out in the desert, you know? So now it's obviously a lot less insane, but it's still really troubling in its own way. You know? Oh, this is about to die. Good thing I brought a spare. So yeah, anyway, I successfully was able to drive the bike out to the base in the desert and all that jazz, so hopefully we will be able to do some more Sandbike Arrakis now that, I mean, everyone missed out on, you know, the beginning of it just because it didn't occur to me to stream it, but if you haven't ever sandbiked across the deep desert, it is very cool. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there. It's, you know, the A region, going between A and B row is definitely the most interesting, but, well, so far. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things to be done there, so we're gonna try part 2 today, and hopefully with this test stream working, I will be able to do that on that front. So